Hey guys, welcome to Now That's Debatable. This is your host, Fantastic Facade. I am joined with my trusty co-host, Triple A the Humanist. And today we have Wes back. Welcome back, Wes. It's been a while.
Yeah, good to be back. Missed you
Good to
guys.
have you back. You've moved house, and that's been part of the delay of getting you back on, but people seem to enjoy when you come, and we enjoy having you, so we appreciate you coming back.
Everybody
And
wins.
everybody wins. And today, uh, from what I've been told, the discussion generically is on transgenderism.
Yeah.
If there's a specific direction either of you had talked about and wanted to jump into, you're more than welcome to take the floor, and I'll just kind of
It was
loop in
yeah.
as
I was gonna approach this like kind of like a wide open way, and obviously our worldviews are gonna come into play here a whole lot, and
Sure.
probably gonna prevent some agreement. So I guess like I'm curious to know like what your understanding of how the Bible deals with gender
Oh,
and in general.
yeah. I mean, that's fairly easy, right? I mean,
Hmm.
Genesis spells out the creation of man, male and female. He created them, and
Hmm.
that's Old Testament for people who want to stick with that. But then Jesus reaffirms that in his ministry when asked, and goes right back to the same passage and quotes it. Made a male and female, and man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. Now, granted, it was a question in the context of marriage, but the principle still holds, right?
So
You go ahead.
I would, to me, that seems to be talking more about sex, not
Mhm.
gender.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, if you want to talk about gender in a linguistic context, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's really where it got its start. You could see that in the Romance languages, Spanish, French, Italian, right? There's masculine, there's feminine, and then there's
Yeah.
neuter.
So, well, I guess I mean, so I'm talking about, I guess, more of gender identity. Because when I think of like biological sex and
Mhm.
gender, I'm not using those words interchangeably. Like sometimes I may, but like in a conversation like this, I mean very two different things. Like when I say sex, I'm talking about we're talking about gametes, we're talking about genitalia, like just physical,
Reproductive characteristics.
yes,
Yeah.
things that I could just look at you and I could determine some stuff about you. When I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about a psychological phenomenon that happens entirely in your brain. that
Yeah.
that in most cases have a strong correlation with your biological sex, but not always.
Yeah. That's really where the issue, quote unquote, of transgenderism comes about because,
Mhm.
for one, it's a relatively recent um, identification, if you will, right? I mean, we don't see people identifying as transgender throughout history. It's 20th century, pretty
Mhm.
much at the earliest, and certainly within the last couple of decades is when it's really exploded into um, sort of the cultural consciousness. Um, but even then, the majority of that time over the last, say, 40, 50 years, uh,
Mhm.
for one to identify psychologically as a different gender than one is biologically, or different sex, if your gender identity and your sex are incongruent, that was for most of our understanding, seen as a mental disorder, a mental illness,
Yeah,
gender dysphoria, right?
right. And that isn't
My
that
understanding of me does not match the physical reality of me.
well. So yes, it was seen as a mental disorder, and I think that's a mistake.
Why
Because
is
like,
that?
well, because when I think of mental disorders, I'm thinking of a malfunctioning brain, and
Sure.
that's not what's going on with a trans person.
You look in the mirror, like if I looked in the mirror and I saw a female,
Mhm.
how is that not a distortion?
I don't
Right?
think that's
I'm
what they're
very
saying. I don't think that's what they're saying. So, like, so when somebody talks about the gender identity, like
mhm.
for instance, let's say, like, do you feel like a man?
I mean, I don't know any other way to feel. So sure,
So, but you do
I,
feel like a man.
I am a man.
Well, that's not
There's
what I
not a
asked
way
though.
for me to feel any other way though.
That's not
right?
what I'm asking though.
Okay,
Well,
so
I'm asking like someone could feel like a man and not be a man, right?
how would they know what that feels like?
Well, well, I don't know.
Right? I
How
mean, like imagine put yourself in their shoes, right?
Mhm.
You feel like a man. What does it mean to feel like
Well,
a woman?
well, to feel like a woman. Well, if you if you thought if that's the way that you saw yourself, not literally in the mirror thinking that you're a woman, but you
Okay.
thought of yourself as a her, as a woman, that would be your gender identity. That's what I would say. That's what feeling like a man would
Right,
be. But
but can you be more specific? Like what would it mean to feel like a woman? Like maybe
Mhm.
some specifics rather, I mean, beyond the blanket statement, I feel like a woman. Like
Mhm.
tangibly, what, or I guess specifically, what does that mean? What does
Well,
it
I
mean to feel
guess
like a
so.
woman?
I well, it's kind of broad, but
Okay.
generally, it would be someone who tends to have very feminine characteristics. Someone
Such as?
who, hmm?
Oops, such as? What kind of
Like
gender
feminine,
or
like
feminine characteristics?
well, I guess like their point of view. Are you trying to ask me like what's a woman? Is that
Not
what we're
yet,
getting at?
but I mean,
Okay,
maybe at some point. But I mean,
okay, we can.
when you talk about feeling like a man or feeling like a woman,
Mhm.
for you, the way I asked the question, if you felt like a woman, can you describe that? Because if we're talking clinically, there's got
No,
to be
so
some symptoms.
no. I know I do know right now that I feel like a man, and I've
Okay.
talked to people who I would say are biological men, but do not feel like men, right? And so when I say I feel like a man, like I said, like I kind of like fit the male stereotype. I was a police officer, army, army infantry, shooting guns, lifting weights, play football, play rugby. I'm a tough guy. And so I kind of like check all these boxes. And then also like I lead my household. I do things that traditional men would do. And so
Okay.
yeah, I kind of like I have this view of myself and I see myself as very manly. Not all people see themselves that way. And so the reason I feel that way is not because of my penis. I feel that way because of my brain. That's why I was saying it was a psychological phenomenon.
Yeah. No, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I don't doubt that it's a psychological phenomenon, but
Mhm.
it if you're going to put yourself, if you're going to explain it in such a way as to feel differently, right?
Mhm.
I think that question still remains unanswered. Can you give some specifics about what it means to quote unquote feel like a woman?
I mean,
Well,
if it helps, as someone who deals with their own mental struggles, I wouldn't say that I've necessarily felt like a woman per se, but I've definitely felt more effeminate at times
Hmm.
than like my typical day to day feelings. And what I mean by that is that I tend to have, and this is just my own personal experience. I'm not speaking for anyone or on behalf of anyone, but how I would say that I feel more effeminate is that I am in a much more emotional state. I want to withdraw to myself. I don't have raging masculinity flowing through me. I don't have a high sex drive. I don't have, this big, broad, let's go work out and shoot guns and punch people in the face for looking at me wrong kind of thing, even though I have a big beard and I'm white and bald and it looks like I might be a member of somebody that's part of a racist group. The reality is that more times than not, like I'd much rather just be a non-socialite, withdrawn, keep to myself, and then I can get in states where I'm more emotional or that I don't feel like a man because I'm a single individual, like as manly because I'm not, out there, having sex with a bunch of women, and I'm not out here, doing this, that, and the other, and these are things that like very typical, masculine, if you would call them, traits that are seen. I'm not out lumberjacking it up. I work on a computer. I know how to cook, clean. I know how to sew. I know how to bake. But And I'm not saying any of those things make me a woman. I'm just saying these are things that, like, through time have been associated with roles that typically women throughout history have played, and men have typically taken on chores that are more physical, like going and killing an animal and bringing it back. you know?
I like to say one thing when we talk about like feeling like a man, feel like a woman. So one thing when I was going through puberty, it wasn't a very uncomfortable phase for me. Like when my body was getting bigger and getting stronger, I enjoyed that. That was like my voice was getting deeper. Like this it meant something to me. And not all biological males have that experience. And there's in some instances when their body becomes more masculine, like it's very traumatic for them. This is someone who I would say isn't feeling like a man because their body is becoming like a man and they're feeling very uncomfortable with it. And it's because of the brain. There's a study that we bring up a lot, and they took these individuals and they just had them work through a problem. And this machine, you're familiar with like machine learning, with how machine learning works? It uses patterns to make inferences about things, pretty much.
Right.
It's kind of like it's like a form of intelligence, like a form of AI. AI is essentially machine learning in its most basic form. And so by looking at the way that their brain operates, it could detect with a very high level of precision whether you're male or female.
Right.
And so there are ways that this machine will just look at your neurological pathways and say man, another way woman. And these people would a lot of times exhibit the same level of intelligence, solve the problems with the same level of efficiency, but the male brains and the female brains would do very different things. There's different parts of it highlighting. There's the neurological pathways are doing different things to solve the same problem. What we noticed is that there are people who were biological men and their brains would solve ways and patterns you would expect to see in females.
Sure.
And the vice versa. And so these people tend to be trans. So when a person is looking in the mirror, a trans person is looking in the mirror, like a trans man, he isn't looking in the mirror and saying, oh yeah, I have a penis. That's not what he's thinking. Or like I have breasts. They're talking about the image that they have.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm saying. That's what I was asking is, do you feel like a man?
Yeah, I mean,
it
goes back to I don't know any other way to feel, right? Because that's what I am. It's like,
cool.
Do you feel like a cat? No, because I'm
great.
a human.
Well, great. So you feel like a man, and so the part of you that feels like a man is because of your brain. That's what I would call your gender.
Okay.
If you were to die, you would no longer have a gender. That's because you're dead. Gender identity is a necessary part of. It's a part of sentience.
Okay.
So if you're no longer alive, you don't see your gender.
And this gets into what I think is one of the many inconsistencies of what might be more broadly called the LGBT or the QIA plus whatever however far you want to go, is that in so many different or rather maybe even the left more generally, in so many areas there's an attempt to minimize the differences between men and women, whereas this particular issue, especially the way that you both explained it, seems to exacerbate the differences, right? Machine learning can detect based on various characteristics precisely because male brains and female brains are different and distinct. However, it seems like a sense of double-mindedness to say that they're completely different, and there's when you identify as the other, what you wind up doing is magnifying the cultural stereotypes, mimicking the behaviors, and often, as we see in, for example, a Dylan Mulvaney, not someone who presents as feminine per se, but rather somebody who is a caricature of a woman, who's trying to copy all of the societal stereotypes, right? Wearing dresses, spending too much money, getting overly emotional, things like that are really.
But that's not a trans person. I wouldn't call somebody like that a trans person. Like I would say
how would you say Dylan Mulvaney is not
well,
trans?
I'm not. I don't know who's that name. You said Dylan Mulvaney. I'm not familiar with that person. But women, but wearing women's clothing like cross dressing isn't the same as being trans. So spending too much money or exhibiting personality traits that are characteristic of females. That's not necessarily what a trans person is. Like somebody could be like, I know some pretty masculine women that they consider themselves just cis women. They're just very masculine, and there's no reason why a trans man couldn't also operate this way. There's no reason why a trans man couldn't have, I don't know, like maybe like the same demeanor as I do, because their gender identity is a function of how their brain operates. Yes, there tends to be a correlation between your gender identity and a lot of gender roles that society expects, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Just like
no, that's why you can get people like me who might look like me and say, well, I feel like a woman, right? Therefore, I am a woman, but there's no physical changes, right? I still dress like a man. I still look like a man.
In their case, they're talking about the gender identity. They're not talking about their sex. That's where I think the conflation.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is.
Well, yes, but they're not wrong. So if they're saying their gender identity is female, they're not wrong. Long as they're not saying
no. Female is a term of biological sex, and this is, you talk about conflation. Yeah. This is something that trans people and allies do very frequently, and that's that's another issue with transgenderism, is language is used to confuse rather than clarify.
You were right about my use of female, so let me change this. So like, all right, so someone looks like you and say that they're a woman, they're talking about their gender identity. Because if they're talking about their gender identity and their biological sex, then they're not trans. They're just a cis woman.
Where are you getting that definition of trans? Because I've talked to several different folks, and trans is now this umbrella term, which includes people who believe themselves to be of an opposite gender, people who believe themselves to actually be.
What do you mean? What do you mean believe to be the opposite?
Like you say, a psychological disposition.
Yeah, but this isn't about a belief. I'm talking about a way. No, it's not. It has so back to that experiment that I was talking about. This has nothing to do with a belief. They give you a problem, they give you a Rubik's Cube, and all you do is solve it. They're not asking you any questions. But while you're attempting to solve this Rubik's Cube, they just look and see what your brain is doing to figure it out. And the machine could detect and say, oh, you know what? This is showing properties that exhibit a male brain. It has nothing to do with a belief.
If I understand what you're saying correctly, you're using trans as a term of ontology that can be applied to an individual regardless of their identity or not, based on something such as this experiment to see how their brain functions.
I've not necessarily. So what my definition of trans, and if someone's trans and watching this, and I know there's at least one. Forgive me if this is wrong, but way I use trans is when your gender identity and your biological sex do not match. If they match, then you're cis. So that's
when you say gender identity, this is specifically how somebody perceives themselves.
Well, yes, but the way they perceive themselves is a direct result of how their brain operates. You perceive yourself as a man because of what your brain is doing. And you could use science to study to see what your brain is doing, and it could detect it. It can look, it's doing these patterns. Boom, it's gonna be a male. They're gonna get that right. Now, like the machine isn't perfect, but that's just the fault of science, right? We can't get perfection. It got better and better. Like they started this study back in 2017, and they've reperformed it in 2024. and it has gotten even more precise. I mean, we'll never get to 100%, but it's getting better.
Okay, so perhaps this might help clarify. Maybe I'm on the right track with how you're understanding. So a test like this, for example, if someone has a child who seems to be exhibiting some behaviors or saying things that indicate they might have gender dysphoria or be transgender, this test could confirm or be used to in part confirm on how their brain operates, whether they are in fact trans.
So,
Basically,
well, this particular type of science has not been used to diagnose whether a person is trans or not. But this
But in
is
theory, it could be.
Yes, it could.
Okay.
yeah. So I mean, like the long and the short is that it's when it comes to sex, at least, when we're talking about sex, is that the brain, male versus female brains, make fundamentally different pathways for similar task, and in oftentimes females typically have more gray matter in their brain than males. When the study was performed, they were looking at the neurological pathways that the brain took to do similar tasks, and were able to distinguish male versus female brains using it. And in those cases, they also determined that more times than not, females had more gray matter than males. So basically, it's not about how you're feeling or what you feel like when you look in the mirror and say this, not necessarily. Like that, what's happening is your brain is actually mapped certain ways that don't coincide with the sex you're born as.
And think about this: when a person says, like think about a person who would fit that description. Let's say they put me in that study and they see that my brain is exhibiting patterns that are indicative of a female, yet I'm in a male body.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to say that I feel like a woman in a man's body, that's a pretty damn accurate scientific description of what's going on, isn't it?
I mean, but then that actually does raise the question that you alluded to earlier. What is a woman?
Well,
Right?
so
And you could ask it either way. What is a man? What is a woman? Right?
all right.
Either way it goes. But if you're going to say it's a category of science, right? And I would agree that
Well,
at least on some level, that science has something to say about this. If you're going to say that being a man or being a woman is, in that under that umbrella, what are the criteria? What are the characteristics?
all right. So when we talk about man and woman, we're not talking about sex, right? We're talking about gender.
Sure.
Okay, because like sex would be easy to find. You could just look at the size of the gamete. Small gamete, sperm, you're a male. Large gametes, egg,
Right.
you're a female. Right. So now when we're talking about like gender identity, this is when we talk about labels. This is more philosophical, and they're not easy because the perfect definition is going to include everything that is that thing and exclude all that isn't. And these are very easy it's very easy to do this with things that have very few properties. Like to describe a black hole be very easy because it only has 3 properties. It has mass, spin, and charge.
To help, I'm not asking for the fringe, right? To see where that line is that limits women from non-women, but I'm asking just some basic fundamental criteria that nobody would disagree with. What is in that category of woman?
That's what I was gonna get to, because when we talk about this label, like it gets much more difficult when we talk about something more complicated, like gender identity. Like, for you ever heard of the problem, what's a chair?
I haven't heard it as a problem.
Could you give me a definition of a chair?
It's pretty problematic in philosophy if you haven't.
I think actually AAA or not AAA, Facade. I think me and you had this conversation, if not on air, then after recording one time around that same idea. Because, right, you start talking about his 4 legs. Well, a dog has 4 legs. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and then that gets to sort of the question that I'm asking, right? There could be a criteria that women share with non-women, but at least women have that trait. And
But
then
not
you
all
can
women.
say,
But
What-
not
what-
all
like
women
not-
may not have
like
it.
not
That's what I
all
was saying.
chairs
Like
have
I
4
can give you
legs.
So,
I can give you a
okay.
definition, and they're almost always going to have caveats.
Oh,
Because I
okay,
think
so
with- I
let
think
me
with
ask it
4
this way.
legs that you may or may not be able to sit on, it may or may not have 4 legs. It may not have legs at all. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Right?
but at least
gets really
philosophically with the
complicated.
chair, you can say, all right, here's a trait. And then an objection comes in and says, well, that definition is too broad because all
Mhm.
these other things have 4 legs. Okay, well, then you add another trait to that to further distinguish it, and you build those traits out, and eventually you get to the point where you have a specific chair isolated
No.
from all the other chairs.
No,
But
what you
All that aside for a moment, when it comes to women, let me just ask it this way. Is there any trait of what it means to be a woman that is universal?
just like the same problem with the chair, we're going to apply that to women. There's not any trait with that a chair has that would be universal.
Okay.
That is just
So,
the problem.
the
with-
answer is no.
Yeah, like nobody's gonna be able to do this. Like I saw like part of Matt Walsh's documentary, and he was asking people this. He just Matt Walsh is entirely inept when it comes to philosophy. There's a lot of problems that he's not aware of, and so he was asking these impossible questions. And unfortunately, there was people who attempted to ask them. Attempted to answer them, and he just wound up looking foolish. So like I can give you a definition of a woman, and then but understand that not all women have these. Some women may have a few of them. Some women may have none of them, and that's kind of what we ran into.
Yeah.
It's the
Okay.
same-
Okay.
it's
And
the same
if that's your
problem with the
position, that's
chair,
your
but-
position. But I would argue then at that point, it's getting linguistically into a realm of again adding confusion rather than clarity. So
Not
when
at
you-
all, because we still know what a chair is.
Well, not necessarily, because when you say I feel like a woman, my question to you is, what does that mean? What does that feel like?
Well,
And
what if I
between
tell
the
you-
two of
but-
you,
but
there
what if I
were
tell you that I'm
basically
sitting on a chair?
stereotypical.
Here's a really easy way to do this, right? Like, and I think AAA was going there, but like, you ready? I'm gonna just throw a random word at you, and I want you to put it in a bunch of boxes in your mind. Okay? You ready? Ball. That can mean so many different things. It has so many different definitions. There's so many different properties it could have, colors, shapes. Even though ball you tend to think sphere, I bet you consider football a ball, right? It's not a sphere. It has ball in the name, right? So things like that.
Mhm.
So when I say ball, you immediately know what I'm talking about, right? You immediately know what a ball is. Even if I don't describe, like, I could say a golf ball with a bunch of dimples on it and it's solid. Or I could have said a basketball and it has a bunch of, little layers going around. It's not actually completely round and it's filled with air. It's empty, right? But you still know what a ball is, right? And you know what a woman is just because you're alive and you're an intellectual adult person. So you know what a woman is when you think about it. There's just characteristics of women that aren't going to fit every other characteristic of a woman. Just like if I describe a ball as something with dimples, I'm perhaps only describing golf balls, right? But that a basketball's a ball. A woman's a woman. A golf ball's a golf ball. Football's a ball. Like, you have boxes that you put all these things into because there are criteria that you look for when you're looking at any word that I say. And you associate that criteria with it, and that's how your brain works. That's how everybody's brain works. When I say chair, the ideal chair, or the chair that is most mapped in your mind, may come as a mental image to you. But I could describe a chair that you've never seen before and never thought about, and you would still say, yeah, it's definitely a chair, and you wouldn't have a problem with it. So if I give you these criteria, and I'm like, here's a woman, and I say, it's a person who's capable of becoming pregnant. Well, women over a certain age aren't capable of getting pregnant, but you'd still call them a woman, right? So, like, there's the problem when you try to get to this really nuanced definition is that you're undoubtedly going to exclude more people than you include. A better thing to do is just, you know what a woman is, that is a woman. You know what a ball is, that is a ball.
Right. So just as you talk about, what is a ball, being round, I could show you the bottom of this water bottle. It's round like a ball, but it's not.
Yeah, I instantly
Right.
discluded
Similarly,
that from balls.
I can look
in,
at the
in my,
three
my
of
head.
us on this screen and go, none of those are women. Regardless of what you say about how you feel, how you identify, how you perceive yourself, neither of us are women.
Right.
Sure.
And most of the time,
that's
you're
a
gonna
level
be
of
right.
clarity that,
But
no,
most-
I will be correct 100% of the time. I
No,
would
you won't.
argue.
No, you wouldn't.
There may be.
You want me to prove it
right?
to you?
But there,
Is this
there
a
are
ba- is this
telltale
a ball?
signs, right?
Was that
No,
a ball?
forget about ball for a second. I mean, when it
but
comes
was it
to
a ball? Right? Like, you see, you don't know because all you saw was a rounded figure of something. I could very well be holding a ball. I could very not be holding a ball, right? And if you didn't know by looking and observing further, you'd never know if it was a ball, right? So your
seeing
observation
a
isn't
two-dimensional image.
well.
you
It
know,
was a
for a
three-dimensional
fleeting
image. It
second.
was actually an octopus.
Right.
It was a three-dimensional image. But
See, there you go.
But you see
Well,
how
I was-
it's nice and round, but you wouldn't fit it in the ball category.
But and that's my point. When it comes to something like a woman, what is a woman or what is a man? That question can be answered regardless of one's own psychological disposition. Because
Well,
quite
so-
simply, as was said I believe it was said in the What is a Woman documentary, and has been said multiple times, you can define woman fairly easily: adult, human, female.
Okay,
does
cool. So
not
let's
fit-
go there. Let's go there.
Sure.
Come
So
on,
you said
let's do it.
you said adult, human, female. What is a
Right.
female?
Well, it goes to the question of sex, like you were talking about before. You can answer it scientifically. Look
Mhm.
at gametes, look at reproductive organs, look
Okay.
at ability to reproduce. look at,
those aren't hard
a menstrual
definitions.
cycle.
Those aren't hard definitions because someone may or may not have a menstrual cycle.
No, but they're
And-
characteristics, and that's the thing.
But so,
Is-
but now you run into the same problem that we were just trying to explain with the word
No.
woman.
No, we weren't, because by design, right? But the general definition of a woman or of a female is one who, for example, can give birth, right? Is the one who is impregnated, as opposed to
No.
the male of the human species.
So,
We can agree with that, correct?
well,
Not
generally, but that's
necessarily.
not a hard definition because there are men who
We're not
have
talking about
menstrual
hard
cycles.
definitions.
But
This is
isn't
part
that
of the
what you
problem when
wanted-
it comes to transgenderism.
But
Can't even give basic criteria.
I could
right?
give
The-
what I
the
said. What I
scriptures-
was saying, but Wes, what I was
Been
saying, I
asking
can't give.
for the whole show.
What I was saying, I can give basic criteria, but like it's going to have caveats.
Oh.
Like, all of them, they're going to have caveats.
And
And
this is part of the problem. And I'm sorry, I'll shut up here for a second because I know I interrupted, but I think it bears to be said. When we're talking about the characteristics of a ball, we can spit those out immediately without front loading all of these qualifications without getting to the criteria. What I
No,
was
you
asking
cannot.
before,
you
just
can't do
say
that
the
with the ball.
criteria and then we can talk about it.
Well,
But
saying you
that's what
can't.
we just
But
did.
that's
Okay,
the
go
point.
ahead.
Like you
I'm sorry.
can't. But you can't do that with a ball. If you say like a ball, like it's some spherical object, then Facade pulls out a football, and now you're saying that's not a ball. Or if I bring out a basketball and it's deflated, now it's not fitting your description. So like if we're going to get that technical, we're going to have to give caveats. We're going to say a ball is something that may or may not be round. It may or may not be perfectly round. Actually, there is no perfectly round thing. So there,
But we're
I
getting
mean,
closer.
yeah, right. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's
All
what
right,
we're.
this is a ball right here. This cellular flip phone.
I was saying that's
that is-
definitely not
this
a
is a
ball.
ball. This is a ball. It identifies as a ball. I identify it as a ball. Who are you to
Okay.
say otherwise?
Well, but now you're straw manning, right? Because
Oh,
when a
how so?
person says that they identify, if I say that I identify as a woman, I am not saying that I have breasts and can give birth and have menstrual cycles. That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
So,
But
so
then the question is, what does that mean? And you haven't been able to answer that question, or you haven't answered the question so far.
That's why I asked you to define female, because I was going to point out how you have the same problem, because you pointed to menstrual cycles and giving birth, and I was pointed out, things that you would call men can do those things. men can have menstrual cycles. Did you know that?
There are
With HRT.
basic exceptions. Okay,
No,
that's
no,
fine.
it's not exception. You get on HRT, you're gonna have a menstrual cycle. It's just what happens
Yeah,
because
but
because of the
it's
lining.
not going to
inside.
have a uterus, right?
So is that the
male.
definition? So you have to have a
No,
uterus.
No, I'm not saying that either, but it's these another one of the issues with transgenderism, like with so many other cultural issues, is normalizing the extreme minority, right? If we say, well, 0.3 men can, 0.3% of men can experience menstrual cycles, but only if there are external hormones inserted in. Well, that
Wes,
doesn't change the nature of the individual.
But
Wes, like, let me.
that's a
can I
caveat
point
that
out?
you have to add to your definition.
Can I
Well,
point out something
and
that
that's
just
fine,
like,
but at least you're
let me?
putting
Can I point
forth
out a
something. You're bringing
mathematical?
something to the table rather than saying, "Here's what's not on the table." That
Can
doesn't
I
answer
point
the
out a
question.
mathematical statistic for you, Wes, just for fun?
Sure.
Let's go with round numbers for the sake of it. There's about 8 billion people on Earth. If you assume 50% of them are born as female, and then you take the number of those people that can have a menstrual cycle, which is somewhere between typically the ages of 10 and the ages of about 40.
Mhm.
And then you take and exclude everybody else, because those are only people that have menstrual cycles and that could potentially give birth. Then you'd eradicate more than about 60% of the women on Earth.
No, you wouldn't.
You
No,
would.
that would be
You-
a foolish exercise to do,
You
because
would.
when a
You'd
woman's
eradicate
pregnant,
more than 60%
a
of women on
doctor
Earth.
can do an ultrasound, look at that baby, and tell you if it's a boy or a girl.
They can
Right.
tell you their
They can
sex.
tell you. They can tell you the sex. They
A
can't
boy
tell
or
you-
a girl, same thing.
But it's
if
not.
you
No,
say
no, no.
boy,
It's
Look,
not.
look,
here's what I mean when it comes to confusion and clarity. When you say boy, you're communicating things that are easily known in pretty much any human society that's ever existed, right? It's only in this society or the West,
Incorrect.
the modern times,
That
is
where
incorrect.
you can say boy and somebody else has to ask, well, what do you mean by that?
No.
That is
So
incorrect.
I had an article ready for you. It's up right now about trans people in India from like the 1500s, and it goes back older than that. But what else? What I was going to say
I'm
was
happy to see it.
yes,
but that's
what I'm
anachronistic.
saying. But
Because
what,
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
they're all over. They're in Australia. They were in ancient Israel. But no, what I was going to say was now when we talk about like our definition, you want something hard, concrete, very technical. But now when you use the term boy, now you're saying, oh, it could be anything. Because if I were to push you on what's a boy, you're going to run into the same problem. Because a boy may or may not have the characteristics that you're talking about. Like if you're going to say what it has a penis, okay, what if he doesn't have one? What if he has both?
A castrated boy, the castrati, the super high pitched singers, they were still male. There was something external that was done to them.
Cool.
That doesn't change the inherent nature of their ontology.
Sorry to be super
that
pedantic here. Hang on. Just for the sake of the audience and anyone listening, because they're going to care. Maybe. They may not care. Castration is the removal of the testes, not the removal of the penis. So eunuchs and castrati are people who have had their testicles removed, not their penis.
Fair correction.
Just wanted to clarify, in case anybody was watching and they're like, I'm a eunuch and I still have a penis. The answer is, yes, you do. Probably. Sorry, just wanted to correct that. But yes, on that same point, I would like to point out there have been multiple studies throughout history in which there's a third or non-gender throughout. There's Greek and Egyptian culture in which had third or non-gender. There are Native Americans who practiced a word specifically called effeminate male. And there are examples of this going all the way back to the earliest forms of writing and like cuneiform and hieroglyphics, where we have what you typically ascribe as effeminate being characteristics of someone who is male. And that's where you get the confusion. And not to kind of gang up on you here, but again, it seems like when you push us for a definition of something, you want something hard and strong that's going to fit all the boxes and check off the right boxes in the right ways. And then when we push you, we could push you on something like female. Even with the definition of female, we'd have a really, really hard time. We'd have to have a lot of caveats. And then you'd be like, well, no, because even when you're talking about, again, women who could menstruate and have children, you're losing more than half of the world's population. He left.
We'll give
Well,
him
this
a
was
second.
fun.
But I don't know. Did you see a Elijah Marie?
I saw, and I strongly encourage that you are very careful with your words, so we may have a guest on in the future.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying that he sent us an email.
Oh, good. All right, sweet, awesome.
That's what I was saying.
I'll get around to checking that, and I'm sure you may already have. But if you'd like to come on the show and have a discussion, we're more than welcome to have a discussion on anything you'd like to talk about. It doesn't have to be here. I don't think he quit. I think he's having
do you
internet
define
issues.
male hard and strong? Was that a double entendre?
Yeah, that's a
Wait,
double
okay.
entendre.
Is that
Dan.
the okay?
Dan, I don't think he quit. I think he's maybe having internet issues. He did just move house, which is a very British way of saying that. He just moved. He got into a new house, and he hadn't even unpacked yet. So he may just be having some internet issues. AAA's reaching out to him now. In the meantime, I'll try to read some of this. I also sent you the email that's been going over the world. I'll read that. Trust and believe everyone has heard the truth. Saying different than me is lying on purpose. Okay. I see. Are you religious, Elijah? Specifically, are you a Christian? I guess that would be a better question. Also, I don't know where AAA went. Now it's just me. But, yeah, with that in mind, Oh, there he's back.
Hey guys, sorry about that. Best believe there will be a sternly worded email to Spectrum.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know you just moved, so I'm not, I know, it may just be a internet issue.
Yeah.
So I was trying to inform the crowd that you didn't quit and just abandon us. You're probably just having internet issues because you just moved, so.
Yeah. Appreciate the patience. Sorry for the mix.
Yeah, no worries.
You were talking
I made up lyrics to a
Two-Spirit,
song
Native
while you were
Americans
gone.
and what have you.
Yeah,
well,
so, I mean, it's just historically,
they're
it's
all
not.
throughout history.
Yeah, it's not as recent as you may think, especially when it comes to people that are either, you would say, like, there's a specific term, and I'm going to use it here, just because when you're reading about some of the historical cultures, they use this term, non-gender, where you have people that didn't really identify as either, and that happened throughout history as well. But there are cases specifically mentioned in Egyptian and Greek culture, as well as Native American culture, in which you have words to very typically describe, like, especially an effeminate male. That would be a very common thing throughout history.
I want to make a point here. So when we talk about like what a woman is, or what a man is, now if we were going to use West's definition, and
what definition was this?
You didn't go into a lot of detail, but I guess it sounds like you were just appealing to what society has determined it to be. Like you say, like all throughout history, people knew what a boy and what a girl was. And that was based off of a few things that we see mostly in boys and mostly in girls, or men and women, right? Now, if we were to use just that, then by your definition, there are men who could get pregnant and give birth to women. I'm sorry, they and give birth.
I doubt that, but
Yeah.
I mean, for one, I wasn't providing a definition. I was providing
Okay.
some characteristics, a description, if you will, if not a firm definition. I don't have
Well, do
the
you have
scientific literature to
you-
firmly define male and female.
do you have like
memorized.
you have a firm definition?
No, I mean, I would consult
Right. So all right. So
a biology or an anatomy text to define mammalian male and female, and be more specific, human male and female.
so
But
here's
that doesn't do any damage to the definition of a woman, right? An adult human female.
it
You
does.
kick the can back to female, so then it
Well,
becomes a
but-
question of science.
Well, no, it's not just a question of science, because like we're still talking about how you categorize things. Now,
Okay.
now if you talk about like what's a female, like tell me what is a female?
I mean, okay, I can Google it real quick and
Yeah, like it's going to vary depending on what type of organism you're talking about. So like with
Well, but
with
human
most-
females, obviously, we're not talking about whales being transgender
Well-
or an octopus.
Sure, but we were talking about male and female, like as a concept, not just how it applies to humans. So like if we were just applied to humans, mostly we're going to look at gamete production. Let's say they don't produce any gametes at all. What's their sex?
Okay,
Are
sorry.
they male or female?
So just a quick Google search, American Heritage Dictionary. I don't know
It's okay, just read it off.
of or denoting the sex that produces ova or bears young.
Okay, so anything that bears young,
Not
female,
anything.
that or okay, so someone can be a female and not bear young?
I mean, well, yeah, presumably every
Okay, so-
woman that's not currently in this moment bearing young.
Or
Right,
maybe
it's
not
not
even
pregnant
capable.
or
Maybe
giving
have
birth.
never been capable of bearing young. It's still a female, right?
Well, if they are of the kind, right? If you're talking scientifically, it would be of the
Kind.
general kind that
Kind's not a
otherwise
very
would.
specific
right?
scientific term.
When you said general, when now you're providing caveats, because that's what we were saying.
Well, sure.
We could say things that
I'm
say
not opposed to that.
these are generally what a woman is, but she may or may not have these properties.
Right, but you were speaking in vague terms, setting the qualifications before providing any of those criteria. I'm at least providing criteria, and then you can say, all right, well, anything that doesn't give birth, would that not be considered a woman? No,
Well-
it's like saying a chair has 4 legs. Well, a horse has 4 legs. All right, we're talking about non-animals that have 4 legs. Like
Mhm.
we're building the description as we go, but at least in this conversation, I'm bringing something to the table that adds clarity. I have yet to hear anything from either
Okay.
of you
All right,
that
so
adds
when I
clarity to the question of what does it mean to be a woman.
So when I
Right.
said so when we in the context of gender identity,
Okay.
what a woman is someone with a brain that has patterns that are indicative of a female.
But that's a question of science, right? Brain activity.
Well, I mean, it's also a question of philosophy. It's how you categorize things as well.
Okay. Okay. So
So typically, if you're showing brain patterns that you would expect to see in a female brain, then I would say that's a woman.
okay. So when I asked previously if you could use that scan because it's descriptive of
Mhm.
what it means to be a woman or potentially to be trans, could you use that as a way to identify someone as male, female, or potentially trans?
Yeah.
And you
and
said no.
Well,
No, he
no,
said-
no.
he
I
said
didn't
it
say
seems
no.
to exclude that.
No.
Okay.
I didn't
Very
say no.
specifically.
But you
And
saying, but you're saying like could it potentially be? Sure, it could. But that's
Okay.
not. But we don't put you under this machine to determine whether or not you're trans or not. I'm sorry, Fasad. I cut you off. You were saying
No, I
something.
was just saying very specifically. He said potentially. I mean, he did clarify at the beginning that that's not the purpose of the experiment. That's not what it's for. And then you pushed him on it and you asked, well, could it be? And he said it potentially could be a way to help.
There we go.
Like, I'm not
Yes.
saying necessarily diagnose, because I think that's a very specific medical term that I don't know that a machine necessarily can do, but it could definitely help make patterns easily understood.
And on top of that, a person could walk in your office, they's not say a word to you, and you could determine whether they're trans. You could. Like, and I'm not talking about like scientific diagnosis part, but you could just look at the person, say, hey, this person is exhibiting characteristics that are indicative of male. Like, you walk in, I see you got a mustache, you don't have breasts, you know, etc. Right? And then I put you under the brain scan and see what neurological pathways is forming while you try to solve a problem. And it's indicative of a woman. Cool, you're trans. And I could get that with up to 90% accuracy.
Yeah, and it gets that right more often than not. And
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
if you and by the way, if your brain is male patterned, it has those neurological pathways that are typically found in males, then it would again identify, and then you would just say, "Oh, you're a cis man," right? Like, so what trans is when your brain patterns aren't matching your sex, typically.
Okay. I appreciate the clarity there because, for one, clarity in any conversation is good. But I find it interesting that that definition is unique to the vast majority of conversations I've had with people who would identify as trans, because the definition that I get from individuals, generally, more often than not, we'll say, are irrelevant to biological physical reality, right? It is described by those people, by those individuals, as a state of mind, as a
So,
belief, as
don't-
a self-perception.
I apologize
no.
to everyone for what I'm about to say, but there are a lot of uneducated people in this world, including people who are trans, including myself on many subjects, okay? When AAA and I have had this discussion off camera multiple times, we've had it on camera a couple of times with you and with other people talking about the idea of transgenderism. And to be perfectly frank, there are a lot of people, myself included, who are incapable of expressing themselves in a very scientific manner as far as what is happening in their brain. And what may come out of that person's mouth, and again, this is not trying to stereotype, it's just the way things are, is that if you had a conversation, because I've had conversations with people who identify as other sexes or genders, or whatever you want to call it in this particular case. We'll say gender for the sake of the argument, because I want to use sex specifically for male and female scientifically. But I've had conversations with people who identify as a different gender than they were born. And when I have those conversations and you ask them, like, what is it like, or what do you mean by that, or what do you mean? And they say, I just don't feel comfortable in my own body. You might hear that. I don't feel like the body that I'm looking at matches the brain that I have, right?
Correct.
And that's kind of you can kind of see why these studies on the brains have kind of gone that direction to kind of map out these pathways, because they may not be aware that their brain is actually forming pathways that are neurotypical of typical male brain patterns, even though they were born as a biological female. But those brain studies are actually what's helping us realize that that is what is indeed causing things like transgenderism. It's when your neurotypical pathways follow a certain line or certain set, and it is not associated with the biological sex that you were born as. I don't know many people in general that could have that conversation well.
That's fair.
At all. So when I say I'm feeling a certain way, or I don't feel like I fit in my body, or etc., when you hear these people that are talking about it, they're just expressing themselves in the best way that they know how. And unfortunately, not a lot of people spend a lot of time reading studies about transgenderism and neurodiversity. Not a lot of people go and read articles about how brain pathways function between male and females, and that we're doing research on trying to study that, and we can actually see neurodivergence in male and female brains. That's not a typical conversation that the average person has, and when you start throwing, and I'll say extremism on both sides of right and left at people, and you just say, you can be whoever you want, and you can identify any way you want, and then you have the right side saying you're either man or woman, and there's no in between, and if you were born with a penis, you're a man, and if you were born with a vagina, you're a woman. That's the end of the story. You have people that are terrified on both sides, by both sides. I think both sides have a lot of blame to push here. But you also have people that are just people that are trying to best express how they're feeling, and when they say feeling, what they're doing is they're doing the best they can to say what their brain is what's happening in their brain. I just don't think anyone particularly is good at it, which is why I think therapy is good for everyone.
So on that, no, I appreciate that, Facade. It's well received. Because I have had some rather difficult conversations with people who identify as trans. But one of the things that comes to mind in this conversation, and I think it's good for the three of us, and I'd like to pose this question to y'all, is the closest way that I know how to understand what's happening here is another form of body dysmorphia, right? Or dysphoria, but I forget the exact term.
No. And let me explain why. So with body dysmorphia, like it's somebody who look at themselves and think they're fat, and they might be really skinny, and that's what they're saying. And so they're starving themselves to do that. Like I'm into weightlifting. I got a bunch of bodybuilding friends that are jack, and they think they're small, and they think, oh, I got this like I mean, like it's like it's a serious problem. They're getting help as a result of this because they're just so obsessed with that. That is not what's happening with a trans person. They're not looking at themselves and seeing something else. They're identify a way in their brain, and in the mirror they see reality. In the mirror they see their biological sex, not reality. They see their biological sex.
No, you were right the first time.
It's part of the gender identity is also reality, because what's going on in the brain is reality as well. But like,
okay, yeah,
it's sorry. I mean, so in both instances, it is reality, but it isn't like in reality they are whatever the biological sex is, and not what the gender identity is. No, that's not what's going on.
That's fair. And where I'm going with this is similar. So you may not like the comparison, but go with me here for a minute, if I may. For an anorexic person who is drastically underweight, right? For them to tell you, I feel fat, right? They may, as Facade said, they may not be able to scientifically explain it. They just know, they look in the mirror and they see somebody that's obese.
Yep.
In our position, right? We find ourselves in the position of somebody who's not experiencing that, but wants to do whatever we can to help that person, right? And in each situation, on a categorical terms, what's happening in the brain is not congruent with what's happening in the mirror. So it is the proper corrective to align the body with the mind, or the mind with the body.
So as far as I can tell, there's no way to rearrange somebody's brain to make it operate like a male. No,
I mean, not necessarily to operate like a male.
No,
but, I mean,
so like, I mean, if you're,
that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on here. So like, their brain opens up certain neurological pathways in a way. It isn't you can't teach somebody to think differently, because that's not what's going on. Because it's not about the way that they think. It's about what their brain is doing. That's not something that you can control.
I'd also like to point out,
are there not ways to teach somebody through, I mean, like the educational process is designed to help people think in various ways, right?
Well, but it's not about your mindset or your worldview. It can be.
Well,
Not
it's
in the,
not
not
in the
what we're
case of
talking about. We're
transgenderism.
talking about we're talking about some things, some phenomenon that is happening inside of your brain. We're not talking about a belief, a worldview, or a perception of yourself. I'm talking about when you try to solve a problem, when you try to do things, what parts of your brain is being most active?
Mhm.
What's going on up there? Like that is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the physical and chemical processes that are happening within your brain. This isn't
Yeah.
affected by your belief.
Well, not necessarily by your belief, but there's behaviors, there's things you can do. I mean, there
Those
have
are
been.
results of what your brain is doing.
Okay, so yeah,
So
the end goal result, right?
let me
What's the best way to approach individuals like this,
It
right?
is
What's the
way
best way to help them?
it is far easier to change someone's body and change someone's clothing than it is to change the way that their brain operates. We don't know a way to do that.
It,
uh,
it's
I,
you
so
say it's easier, but is it better?
Yeah,
well
that's what the studies show. They tend to live
In
far
what way?
happier lives after. Well, because
Far happier lives? Aren't the
yeah,
studies that show like suicidality tend to
so
go up after
no,
um, surgical intervention?
no, definitely not. So no,
Okay.
what tends to happen if you see the studies. So trans youth tends to be far more suicidal than non-trans youth. However, trans youth who have the support of both of their parents, or at least the one that's in the household, their suicidal rates are just about equal to the non-trans people. So
And what does that look like on a long-term scale?
good, it improves, especially afterwards. And what increases their happiness, increases their emotional health, is being accepted that way in society. So if I were to transition into a female, if I'm if in society I'm being treated that way, that's gonna make me more healthy emotionally. But if I'm constantly being misgendered, saying, "Oh, that's a dude in the dress," all that kind of stuff, yeah, those are the problems.
I'd also like to
They,
And
point out like two things real quick, and I think it may help you understand the difference that like transgender versus like other things that were constituted as mental illness. And I'll say like for instance, depression is a mental illness that I suffer from, and depression
same here.
can take a couple different forms. And if you know anything about it, is typically either a low production of dopamine or a incorrect intake of serotonin, right? So your brain either doesn't produce enough dopamine or it doesn't intake enough serotonin once it's produced, right? These are two things that are chemicals that your brain literally produces. There are other forms of depression as well, but these are very two typical forms of depression. And you can get things like SSRIs or stimulants or things that help you produce these chemicals in your brain. However, when it comes to things like transgenderism, these are neurological pathways that have been formed in your brain. You can't quite just go in and rewire them. It's not like a computer where you plug something in the wrong way, you can just unplug it and plug it in the correct port, right? Once these
Hmm.
neurological pathways are formed, that's the way your brain functions. Now, you may have chemical imbalance as well, and there are drugs that can help with chemical imbalance by producing more dopamine or serotonin, etc. But there aren't really ways to re completely kind of rewire the neurological pathways in your brain, with exception of pretty severe brain damage. Like, but
Well, I mean, to your point earlier about therapy, isn't part of therapy helping to recontextualize and
so
understand one's own circumstances?
so that's what I was gonna say, and I don't
Sure.
like using the term overly, but therapy is kind of about acceptance. It's accepting that you are aware there's something going on in your brain that you either can or cannot control. Most of the time, you cannot, because it's really hard to control what your brain is doing on its own.
Sure.
And learning to kind of and I don't like to, I don't want to use the term cope, which is why I use the term acceptance, but like coping with it in healthy methods and manners, right? So if you have depression and you were to go see a therapist, they're not going to cure your depression. They're going to help you come up with ways to accept that you're, although you have depression, there are things you can do to help deal with depression in healthy methods and manners and ways. And if you are a transgender person and you were to go to therapy and your brain has formulated these pathways, a good therapist would do the same thing as a good person treating depression and say, these are pathways to success. Well, there are things that you can do to increase the success of someone that's that has depression. And one of those things is, making lists, coming up with things that you have to live for, that you aspire to do in life, that goals that you can set, stuff like that. You have like things you can either write down or mentally note, and you can kind of go back through those when you get in a state of depression to help lower the severity of it. Does the depression still exist? Absolutely.
Sure.
But there are ways that you can help kind of keep you from sliding into headfirst into a pit that therapy can help you with. And as far as we can see from studies of people that are being supported in the trans community, that are either having surgery or doing things so that their brain is indeed matching what their body is, like having surgeries or growing their hair out or growing a beard or getting on testosterone or getting on estrogen, etc. So you feel more effeminate or you look more effeminate because you feel effeminate already, then your brain is putting these pathways kind of in the right alignment. Just like when someone who has genuine body dysmorphia, like Murph was talking about, or Triple A was talking about, how he's got people that are jacked that feel like, they say, I'm so small. Well, if they go to therapy and they say, look, you're a really muscular guy and you can look at the average of the bicep and you can measure your own and be like, there are like things you can do that can show you that you're not a tiny person. There, you can step on the scale. You can measure your biceps weekly. You can, have a journal in which you talked about how you hit your all-time high weight this week or whatever, etc. And then those things are ways that you're dealing with that in a positive manner.
Right.
You wouldn't want to take someone, at least from the studies, in my opinion, you wouldn't want to take someone whose brain is constantly telling them that you're going this way, down this path, and then try to snatch them off the road the other way, because now you're basically telling the brain that it's wrong, it's not correct. And what's wrong
with that?
Well, what would be better than that is just having that person accept that it's okay to be going down this pathway because that's the way your brain is wired, and there are things you can do to have an overall healthier and happier lifestyle by learning to accept that it's okay that you have a brain that does these things, because you can't change the pathway that's formed in your brain. If there were, for instance, a lack of dopamine or serotonin, perhaps we could talk about drugs for chemical changes. If there is a genuine feeling that, making physical changes to your body will improve your happiness, and you have the support of your friends and family, I don't see why that would be a problem. But what would be really hard to do would be like, and perhaps even impossible to do, would be essentially rewiring the brain. Going in and saying,
I don't mean rewiring the brain, because that starts to get into weird issues like the electroshock and all that kind of stuff. I'm not
and like we don't want to go down that path. I don't think anyone should or wants to go down that pathway. And I'm not saying you would. I'm just saying, like, to me it seems like an easier and overall better option for people that have transgenderism or that are dealing with transgenderism. The better way is since you cannot change the brain without potentially physically altering it, electrocution, etc., is allow them to change their body if that's how they're going to express themselves and feel better about themselves. Like, what? I don't see what's wrong with that.
Also, I wanted to
Well-
say really fast. It seems like
Sorry, I've been
you're
ranting.
kind of
I'm shutting up
operating
now.
under the assumption that the body is the correct one, and so we should just align the brain.
That's
to
fair.
fit that. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Well,
I would challenge
I'm
that
not. I'm not
assumption.
saying align the brain like the way Facade was talking. I just want to clarify. I equivocally am not advocating electroshock therapy or anything like that.
Yeah, sure. But let's say I have a male body, I have a female brain. What's the real me? What should I be?
If we're going to use those terms, then you're a man, right? Because you're in a male body, right? There's one part of the body that's incongruous, but like when we talk about
Yeah, but that one part is pretty significant. Like it's
Well,
the
sure.
it's like the most significant part of you. Like if I were to change your body, you'd still be Wes, as long as you still have all your same opinions, beliefs, and all. The fundamental nature of what makes you is your brain.
Sure.
So would you say that what most closely aligns of your true identity shouldn't that be your brain, not your body?
Yeah, I want to take a step back. I said sure, but I said that too quickly. I was agreeing with you in part, but I would disagree with the premise that our mind is who we are in exclusion to the body. I think that's a fundamental error of transgenderism broadly, is a rejection of that.
Well,
I mean,
I wouldn't say
we are.
I don't even say that's a problem
But I
with
would-
transgenderism. I would say that applies to all humans. That you are your brain. Like literally, all of your
brain is part of your physical body, right? So we're not going to
Yeah,
separate brain.
But
Because
if we're
that's-
talking about the essence of you, your brain is I would say is the most important. Like it's far
your
more
brain
important
is the
about you,
most you can be.
than any. Like if I were to chop off your penis, you'd still be Wes. If I
would.
was to arrange your brain, you wouldn't be. You'd
Sure I
be
would.
you'd be some. What makes you you? Like sure, the legal definition of Wes of would be still
No,
be
no,
in his
not
body.
not
when
even
I'm talking
that.
about when we're talking about like the essence of you, the fundamental nature of you, it would be different. You wouldn't even be the same
psychological-
person to
You'd be-
to your
you'd be a
wife and
completely
kid.
different person.
I got to
psychologically.
disagree with that
Okay.
because so I would say fundamentally we are mind and body, right? We are, in Christian terms, our soul as well as the physical body that we're in. We're material
you're
and
both.
non-material. And
Yeah.
well, what you seem to be advocating for is that you are your mind, or at least you're both, but the mind drives the rest of it.
The mind
Right?
does
There's,
drive the
there's a
rest
ranked
of
order.
it.
I'm saying they're equal. So
Well,
when you
so, like,
say
let me-
if my
let me-
brain's different, I'm a completely different person to my family. I'd say
Yeah.
that's not true because when
But
I
we know
hug my
that is
mom
true.
or when I hold my wife's hand, that's the same me. That's no different
But-
if my brain is different.
Have you heard
Let
of
me-
what happened with Phineas Gage,
Yeah, I was gonna say
I-
like,
the
this,
railroad worker?
this is
I-
back in
The
the
pipe
1800s.
it went through his head. It completely changed his personality.
Sure.
Like he was
I
a
think I
different.
have heard of that actually.
Yeah,
Forgot
he
his
was
name.
like he was like a very strong religious man,
Mhm.
good guy, and then all of a sudden thing goes to his brain. It completely changed his personality.
Yeah, I mean, doing brain damage to somebody can turn them into an atheist, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, sure.
that can happen, and it can turn him into a Christian. Like just like when they cut off they split
They
the
split
what's
the
that
corpus-
thing that connects
corpus-
the brain?
The corpus callosum.
Yes, they separated, and the more rational part was the atheist, and the less rational part, more imaginative part was Catholic. Now,
People with
You know,
epilepsy sometimes.
yes.
That's the worst of both worlds.
so, but what I'm saying is like I'm not saying that your body doesn't matter at all. But what I'm saying
Sure.
is, I would say yes. More accurate description is the hierarchy. Your mind is far more important to what the essence of you is, rather than like, if we were to swap brains with Facade. Now, when we talk about who West is, it would be the guy in the NASA shirt, right?
I don't
Really?
know. I
That
don't
guy-
know.
that guy would-
here. Let me.
I'd
let me
say
make
you
a
have two
conscious-
completely
let me-
new
Hold on,
individuals.
hold on. Really easy. You ready? Let's pretend somehow you and I could swap brains, okay?
Yeah,
And
let's do
then
it.
Triple A, we were in a room but like together. Okay, we
Mhm.
just woke up from surgery. Perfect brain swap. I have your brain, you have mine. And Trubelay calls out the name Wes. Which person's shirt is going to answer him?
Probably the one with the NASA shirt.
Exactly. You know why? Because
That's
all
Wes.
your thoughts, memories, and identity are formed in your brain. And when he says Wes, the brain that is inside my head, the sound is going to travel through my ear canal. It's going to vibrate in a certain method. It's going to go to my brain, which is going to recognize it as my name. Because
Well, sure, I
am
can go by that
Wes.
name, but it's. I understand where you're coming from with the hierarchy. I simply disagree with it, because I would say in that example, right? You give us a year or two in these swapped bodies, we will be completely different individuals from who we are now, because you would have
only
a different
because
body
you're-
and so would I.
Only
and
in
our
the
minds would acclimate to that.
only in the
and there
manner
would be
that they're
two new
adjusting to that
individuals,
body. though.
regardless of how we answered or who we responded to.
It's only in the manner that it's adjusting to that body, though. Like, you would still have your own preferences, your taste, your desires, your hopes, your things you do for fun, things you
Still
get
be a
bored by.
Christian.
But
You'd still
those,
be a
those
Christian.
may actually change
I mean,
in
they
various
might
ways.
because of the limits
depending-
of my body. You're a skinny dude. I'm a fat guy. I have no hair. You have hair. Like, there are things that you wouldn't do if you had my body, and there are things that I wouldn't do if I had your body, right? Like, so, like, yes, your brain is going to change to it, but my preferences, my desires, my knowledge, my memories, my history, all of that's still up here, and it's not going to change just because I have a
Sure it
different
will.
body. It's not going to change
Right,
just because
I mean,
I have a different body.
but
Why
for
would my
example,
memories or
preferences,
history change?
right? Let's just one simple example: preferences.
Sure.
The
I
way our
love
bodies
peanut
process
butter.
food, for example, may be different, right? If
your
I'm
brain.
lactose intolerant and you love ice cream, we swap brains. Over time, you're going to eat less ice cream, because
Yeah, but
when
it's
you
only
do,
be-
But that
it's
doesn't
only
mean he
because-
like it less. This is because his
Yeah,
body has an
that's
intolerance.
only
to
because
it.
my
no,
body
but
has an
because the
intolerance to it.
physical response plays a part in my desire. If I eat something that does physical damage to my body or presents
Yeah,
physical,
but-
what feels like physical damage,
Here's
I'm
what
going to want that thing less because I
Here-
want that damage to my body
But
to be minimized.
here's what you're doing though, right? You're saying now there's this restriction that I didn't have before, therefore my body's going to change to it. It's just like if we didn't change brains, right?
Mine's going to change to the body.
Right, but hang on. It's just like
Okay.
just like we swap brains, right? Well, let's pretend like we didn't swap brains, and for some reason you got in a horrible car accident. Not wishing this upon you, but you got in a car accident and you lost your right arm from the shoulder.
Correct.
Okay, your body is going to learn to adapt to that because of this hindrance that you have, right?
Correct.
But if I didn't swap brains with you, I wouldn't have lactose intolerance, and my preference for ice cream wouldn't change. Let's go for a 1-for-1. Are you allergic to peanuts?
I am not.
Okay, great. Neither am I, and peanut butter is one of my favorite things. Okay, if you and I swap brains,
Pretty
my
great.
love for peanut butter is not going anywhere.
Well, sure, but I mean that. My point in that is that there are connections between the mind and body, right?
But
Or
only
as you say, the
because,
brain
like-
and body. You take
like-
you take that one part out of the body, right?
But
and granted,
it's because of
if we're
the
talking about, good.
it's because of the way the brain learns the body. You know what I'm saying? Like in your situation and the scenario you gave, the brain is going to learn to associate eating ice cream with something bad happening.
Mhm.
Versus right now, I'm not lactose intolerant. When I eat ice cream, I get happy because there's lots of sugar in it, and sugar is a drug that's akin to cocaine.
And it
how
tastes great.
It tastes great, right? And so when I eat it, there's no bad side effects for me other than I'm probably less healthy than I was before I ate the ice cream, but that's not an immediate effect that I'm going to get, right? I
Right.
get happy from the ice cream. I'm content with it. In your situation, if I switched to your body and had lactose intolerance, I would only change. My brain would only adapt to that because of the negative associations that are coming with it. It's like touching a stove. You don't do it when a stove, like you can do it when the stove's not hot and you're never going to get burned. You only stop doing it when you get burned.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? Like you learn from things that are injuring your body or that are harmful to it, and your brain does its best, dead level best, to keep it safe. And in the
Yeah.
situation of being lactose intolerant, my brain would pretty quickly learn that having lactose items like ice cream does bad things to my bowels, and it would probably stay away from it. But that's not
Yeah.
because my body is saying so. It's because my brain has recognized the things that are happening to my body, and it's trying to protect me from it. I could then go in and say, like, I don't care. I'm going to eat as much ice cream as I want. And my body will hate me for it, but my brain is still drugged out on the ice cream.
Well, and that's kind of my point, is that it's not simply the brain's recognition of it, but it's the reality that your body is experiencing that as well. It's they work in tandem
Like,
in that
if-
way.
Doesn't it
And-
make more sense to adjust your body for who you are instead of changing who you are to fit a body?
See that question has a presupposition that I can't align with, and that's the you is your mind, and the body needs to be or that
So let's
who you
say
are
they
is your
put-
mind rather
let's
than a
say they-
combination of your mind and body.
let's
And
say-
again, I'm putting them equally. That's how I understand it.
Okay, like you ever seen Futurama?
Oh,
Just,
a little
you
bit
know,
here and there. It's been
well,
a while.
there's a guy there. I think is it Nixon. His head is in a jar. He's still talking and he's
Right.
alive and everything.
all
Like,
the
so,
presidents, by the way.
okay, so
and-
let's say
and
they
all
did it
the-
to me. They took my head, they put it in a jar, and I was still alive, still
Mhm.
talking to you. So I had no body. It was just me. And I would still have all the same beliefs. I was still an anarchist, atheist, etc. Like, would you still say I'm triple X?
No.
Really?
I don't think I would. Yeah. I mean,
What am I then? Like, who am I?
Assuming, I mean, you would still go by that name, right? But you're a completely different person without.
No,
body.
not at all. I'm
No,
the same guy.
Ontologically,
If
you're a
you-
different person because you have a different makeup.
So if I chop off a fingernail, not a finger, just a fingernail, I have a different makeup. So I'm a different person now.
Yeah, 100%.
I shaved my
You'll be able to
head.
play the guitar better because the fingernail won't be getting in the way of the pick.
but seriously though, okay, because then you saying because the makeup's different. Like I shaved my head right before the show, so you saying I'm a different person before and after that I shaved my head.
This
Oh, I
is-
guarantee you, every time I shave my head, I look like a completely different person.
This
Okay,
is-
but you not are like you are still Wes, whether or not
Right,
you
I'm
shave
mostly
your
the
head.
same. I got a haircut.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, wouldn't you say that I'm the same person?
This is the classic ship of Theseus. Like, this is literally the ship of Theseus.
Well, sorta. But
Yeah.
in this,
Like,
Well-
we're trying to see, are there any parts to your body that you could replace? Like, how
I
many parts
guess.
of your body to replace?
Yeah, I mean, I'm
to
not the
fire
same
up
person
a
I was,
right?
what, 7,
Like-
8 years ago? Is that how long it takes? Is
Yeah,
it
about 7
years?
It's about 7 years
Yeah.
for all the cells in your
Yeah.
body to regenerate.
So technically, I'm a different person, but I
but
look the same.
but you know what's ironic? Like the brain cells, those don't get replaced.
Yeah.
Those stay the same throughout your life. They don't regenerate or anything like that.
Well, they don't
Those are the things
regenerate, but
they
there's a
can
level of
feel.
elasticity.
They don't, but they don't change. You have your brain cells don't get replaced. The rest of your cells do, and that's the one thing that we're talking about that doesn't that is you.
Well, I mean, I want to be really pedantic, but your teeth don't regenerate either.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's fair.
just throwing it out there. But yeah, no, I mean your brain can actually heal if it's damaged. Your teeth are the only things that can't
Yeah.
heal.
Okay. Yeah.
But
But,
brain-
your
brain
brain can heal.
cells
But what I'm
don't-
saying,
don't-
but brain
Yeah,
cells don't.
brain
get
cells
replaced.
don't
Not
go through,
naturally
like-
regenerative.
Yeah, they don't go through
that's not what's happening. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that
they don't go
process
through
you were talking about, where your
mitosis.
body like changes itself over time, that doesn't apply to the brain.
Yeah, brain cells don't go through cellular mitosis and split off and then develop themselves, and old ones die and then they're flushed out of the body. All other cells in
Yeah,
the
what
body,
he
with
said.
exception,
Yes.
all other
rest
brains,
of-
all other cells do that, with exception of teeth.
Right. And so that's what I would say. Like, if you chop my head off, you put me in the brain, it's still me. Like that dude that was in the jar on Futurama, that was Richard Nixon.
Well, there was a guy playing Richard Nixon. but-
Yes, the guy playing Richard Nixon. Yeah. Okay, but that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
if you were to replace his brain and swap it with George Washington, well now that's who he is. If you would have put Richard Nixon's hand in a jar, I would say that was Richard Nixon's hand. I wouldn't say it's Richard Nixon. I wouldn't say if somebody chopped your hand off, that's Wes' hand.
Yeah.
That's Wes.
And this gets back to what I was saying early on in the conversation, is that transgenderism tends to be a mental, right? I mean, you could say brain, but I mean, built into that is information and mind and, you know, non-physical elements of the calculation that are in isolation, at least from a reasoning perspective, from the rest of the body.
Well,
And I find that to be pretty detrimental.
I wouldn't say
when
it's
you
in
do that.
isolation, because like
Well, no-
so, but they're kind of cooperating, like in a such, right? Like your brain tells your, like for instance, like when puberty starts, right? I think it's your pituitary gland,
Pituitary.
Yeah, pituitary. Yeah. So that tells your your testicles to produce testosterone, and when they do, when your balls do that, it has a direct effect on your brain. So they're kind of like they're not separated here, like they're strongly connected.
I mean,
And
they're so strongly
that's my
connected.
point.
If they're
It's
so strongly connected,
the
that the
non-physical
brain,
and the physical.
But what
they're
I'm
so
saying is, but I
strongly
wouldn't say that
connected
the
that the
person
brain
is
has
their
to-
balls. The person is their brain. If you can cut their balls off, they're still who they are.
Yeah, I mean, they're so strongly connected that the brain actually has to initiate the pathway or the handshake between your brain and everything that ever happens by your body.
Agreed.
So, like, your brain is the center controller in which all things are obeying the whims of, if you will. If the brain sends a signal to the foot, and vice versa, like if you want to lift your foot, the brain is what lifts the foot, not your foot lifting the foot, not your foot lifting the brain, obviously, right? So the brain sends a signal, typically down the back of your spine, all the way down through your leg to get to your foot. Your foot then complies with the brain's request because it has no other option to do so unless it's damaged, and it lifts the foot. So it's the body is being controlled and operated on every level, from the chemical to the physical to everything in between, by the brain. That's why, like, most people that I know, even that are Christian, kind of prescribe to the idea that you are your brain. Like, I think C.S. Lewis famously said you are a brain and you have a body, right?
You are a soul and you have a body.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, I mean, like, if you want to ascribe that to your mind or your brain or whatever, like, the physical thing that's there is your brain. Some people say the metaphysical thing of the mind. Some people call it the soul. Some people even use the heart, you know. But, like, we know that the physical heart is not what's controlling everything, but the brain literally is.
And that's where gender lies. That's what. So when we talk about your gender, it's about it's about your identity. Like, you identify with your brain. Your penis doesn't do that. Your hand doesn't do that. Your foot doesn't do that. Like, that's all your brain.
Just shout out to Robin real quick on the chat, just because we had a chat. Hi, Robin. Welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. If you have they said if you have a stroke, your brain can build new pathways. Yeah, your brain can actually recover from brain damage. It can recover from things like strokes. It can recover from things like aneurysms. If there are embolisms in the brain, it's a little harder, because sometimes that means the embolisms bust and then you have internal bleeding on the brain. It's usually not caught in time. But yeah, brains can form new pathways due to, like, physical damage or, like, internal damage like strokes. And then they said, actually, trans people just exist like all of us on a spectrum. The issue isn't the people, it's the idea that here are two boxes and you put one in one or the other. And we made up boxes, and there's no responsibility to follow those boundaries. Hi.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we typically agree as far as, like, gender identity is that there's just boxes that we put things in and we kind of typically associated with, but there's no rhyme or reason as to why necessarily one person has to fit in one box or the other. And you're definitely going to exclude things by saying this person belongs in this box. What you're going to do is you're going to cut off a lot of attributes and aspects of people, and you're going to do that with any box.
That's the definition problem I was talking about. He said nature has no responsibility to follow our boundaries. Yes, like it's kind of all gray, and we're just putting lines on there and saying this is that. But and that's what I was going to ask Wes. Like, would you at least acknowledge that that male and female kind of exist on a spectrum, or man and woman exist on a spectrum?
I would not. No, I think it's foolish to go down that road precisely because of some of the, if nothing else, the social implications that we've seen over the last, I don't know, a couple of decades, at least that I've seen.
With male and female, or man and woman, or both?
Both. Both.
Okay.
So I mean, male and female. I mean, it's kind of you're one or the other. You know.
So what would you say? So let's say that someone has XY chromosomes, and they have breasts, periods, and ability to give birth to children. Like, what are they?
That'd be good. I honestly don't know the answer to that.
That this would imply to me. This would imply the spectrum.
Well, it might, but realistically speaking, realistically speaking, how many people have those characteristics?
So,
what percentage of the population has those characteristics?
So, if we're talking about like what percentage of the population is asexual, it's about between 1.5% to 2.5%. It's about the same percentage of people that are redheaded. So this isn't uncommon. And what I was going to say was the person that I would describe to you, they could fit in either box. But I would say if we're going to call that person a man, I am definitely more man than that person is, because I have more properties that are indicative of a man. For instance, I don't have breasts. I don't have periods. This person does. But if we're going to talk about a woman, well, my wife would fall more in line because she has those things, but she has XX chromosomes instead of XY. This is why I was talking about how this is definitely like a spectrum.
I mean,
it can't be two boxes, because you're going to have people that fit into neither.
In fairness, if you're going to say it's a spectrum, it's heavily weighted on either side with a very small slice in the middle.
I mean, I don't even think you necessarily agree with that if I pushed you on
it's just it's a small percentage.
For instance,
a small percentage, very, very small percentage.
8 billion
generally
people.
speaking, and I would say
that accounts for hundreds of millions of people.
Okay.
Can I just point out something kind of? I think it's kind of funny. Let's do this. Arnold Schwarzenegger with his beard and mustache, smoking a cigar, holding a minigun. Are you as manly as that?
I mean, it depends on your definition of manly. If we're talking like 80s action hero, of course not.
My point exactly, though, right? You have to qualify what you mean by this just to be on the same level as Arnold Schwarzenegger in an 80s action movie. It is a spectrum even on your scale. Even if you completely identify as a male, right? Even if you completely identify as a man, you would say that there are people that are undoubtedly manlier than you are.
I would say that there is diversity in masculinity and femininity, right? Just
so
like there's diversity.
They're more manly than others, and they're more feminine than others.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Bob Vila building houses, but I can fix a leaky pipe. I've discovered, so there are basic differences, right? I'm not jacked like AAA, but I'm not I'm not Christian Bale playing Dick Cheney either.
Right.
So it's just there's diversity in there, but nobody is more or less male, more or less man, right? To say manly is to import a particular standard, and that's what I was assuming that you were getting at. That doesn't therefore mean there's a spectrum, though.
I don't
right,
like
because everybody there with all of that diversity is still masculine, is still manly.
I'm gonna be super pedantic here and say that
Come on.
ly, the attribute ly, added on to man means it's giving the attributes thereof, right? Like, so if you would say manly, it's because it contains the attributes of man, right?
And
so,
adding
like,
to that
well-
pedanticism, you would agree there's a difference between the denotation and the connotation, right?
Well, yeah, if we're gonna be
Sure.
pedantic, sure. So
Okay,
but
so
what
yeah,
we're-
denotatively, yes, that's the case. Connotatively, when you're describing Arnold
No,
Schwarzenegger with a
you-
minigun and a
I
cigar,
am not. I'm
we're
not
talking in a
nearly
more
as,
connotative fashion.
I am not nearly as manly as Arnold Schwarzenegger with a cigar and a minigun. I will gladly say that.
Don't
all
sell
day.
yourself short, man.
I am much more effeminate than that. I've considered getting a pedicure. I haven't done it yet because,
But
but I've considered it.
but the Ren is back.
That's
So
just
what I was
basic
gonna
good
say-
hygiene, man.
It seems like so, but it seems like so when we talk about the properties of what a man is or what a woman is, they in reality they exist along a spectrum. What we've done is arbitrarily drawn a line and said, okay, if you're on this
arbitrarily?
side,
Well,
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
I mean,
go ahead.
it's kinda
well,
arbitrary.
yeah, it's kind of arbitrary. Because you disagree?
Yes, very, very much so. I mean,
Okay.
the line between man and woman is along the lines fundamentally, and I mean, even in evolutionary terms, right? This isn't something that's unique to Christianity. What does it take for humankind to continue generation after generation? It takes
Reproduction, not
right.
well, but not everybody produces.
man and woman, or male and
No, no.
female,
Well,
coming together to produce offspring, and that continuing. Right?
That
If
gets
we get
really
into the habit
complicated
of
when you
taking
get outside of
kids
humans.
who believe themselves to be the opposite sex,
But-
chop off their genitals, sterilize them, that's the end of the human race.
No, I mean, so there are things that
Am I
can
wrong?
exist. There are things that can exist asexually, and like there's no
Humans?
reason. Well, currently, no, that is not the way we reproduce. That doesn't mean that
Okay.
that couldn't happen in the future. No telling. But I've and I don't know of any case when a species like sexually divulged that they actually come back in and start reproducing like sexually. I don't know. That would be an interesting biological question. But I would say this is still lines that we have drawn, and that nature itself does not necessarily comply to it, because there are things that you would say is definitely a man, but do things that we would say only a woman could. Like there are people with XY chromosomes that have given birth to healthy children. Now, scientifically, that's a man, but they're giving birth. They're getting pregnant and giving birth
Why would you
So
say
this-
it's a man as opposed to
because
a
XY
woman with a genetic abnormality?
because they're chromosomes.
Right, or a chromosomal abnormality. Why would you say? Well, why would you
Well-
not say it's a woman with a chromosomal abnormality?
Because the chromosomes is what's telling them what to do. I would say what's
Clearly not.
Yeah, it's getting it wrong, and that happens with everybody. Like they're like your your chromosomes. I don't want to get things wrong here, because I'm not a biologist. But your body doesn't always do what your chromosomes dictate,
Okay.
and so I see no reason to say this is definitely a woman because she's giving birth, and there's just a problem with her chromosomes, instead of just saying the vice versa of that, saying it's a man because of the chromosomes who's giving birth. You're just choosing that arbitrarily. I wasn't even saying that it's a man or a woman. I was saying using your definition, or using the scientific using the definition of chromosomes. There are people who would fit the category of male that can give birth.
Even
causes
if
a
that's
problem.
the case, for one, it's still not an arbitrary distinction. I mean, if nothing else, there is a societal function, a civilizational function to this distinction that's drawn. So if you want to come at it from a different perspective and say, well, because it's XY chromosome, that's the determining factor of man versus
Well-
woman or male versus female, okay, I'm not going to argue with you on that point. What
If
I
it
will
wasn't-
argue is that, or what I will argue against is that because this very rare genetic abnormality exists, therefore everything else that we know about gender and sex and human reproduction and humanity in general is therefore upended because there's
No.
some that's what I was talking about,
That's not what I
normalizing
said.
the extremes.
I
I
didn't
know
say
that's
it
not
was
what you're
upended.
saying.
I'm saying it's along a spectrum. That's what I was pointing out. Not that it's upended. Not that we could forget everything that we know about man and woman and male and female, but just that it exists along a spectrum. There are people who we would consider male who exhibited feminine characteristics,
Okay.
and so that will be along a spectrum.
But if they're
That's
male,
not a.
that's the
Mhm.
diversity within male. That's not a spectrum. That's diversity on one end of the pole.
It is, because then there are females who can't get pregnant.
Okay. That's
And there are
diversity at the other end of the pole. That's not a spectrum. That's
No, but
that's
you're
confusing.
putting the but you think you're putting the pole in an arbitrary position, because I
I'm
could
not
move it over.
putting it there.
I could
I'm
move it over here.
recognizing that it exists.
You're not
That's
well,
the difference.
Well, it's not a recognition. Like it's a pole that this specific culture has put there. If it was universal and concrete and like had some intrinsic basis in reality, then we would expect all the cultures to agree, right? But that's not what's happening.
Basically, they do, right? I mean, you
hang
go
on.
back
No,
through
they don't.
history.
Well,
Was it Henry
hold on.
VIII had wives killed because they couldn't bear children, right? Across the world,
Henry
in
VIII had wives
the
killed
Far
for lots
East,
of reasons.
there's shame if you're a man and you don't have, a son, for example. I mean, there's all
Sure,
kinds
but-
of historically.
but
So to
if
your
you-
point, it is universally
It is.
accepted.
It's not,
But-
because
but-
they have different
can I-
genders.
can
Like
I-
I was
can I
pointing out,
point
even in
something out?
ancient Israel, I think they had 6 different genders.
No, they didn't.
They did. It's
I-
just not described in the Bible, but yes,
I-
they did.
can
They
I-
sure did.
Can
I
I point out
guarantee-
something that could be really obvious, or that we might just be missing? Like let's pretend I'll use this because it's closest thing to a ruler that I have nearby. This has a pole on this end and a pole on this end, correct? Like this, if this were like a
Mhm.
magnet, you would say like north and south.
Sure.
Sure. So we would say that like this is the epitome of manliness, and this is the epitome of womanliness.
The epitome. What do you mean by that?
Like the most woman you can woman. Because you understand that it's like, just like some men are less manly than other men, there are some women that are less women than other women.
Okay.
As you get more masculine, you move closer to this side, right? And you get to the epitome of manliness. And as you get more feminine, you move to this side, which is the epitome of womanliness. That is the definition of a spectrum.
That's
Even-
not
even
what
in
I'm
a-
referring to, though.
even
But
on a
I see your
pole
point.
system.
I see your point.
Also, I wanted to say this: in ancient Israel, there were 8 genders, and recognized by the Talmud and Jewish tradition. And I'm not going to try to pronounce them, all of them, but you have something called male, you have female, and then you have one that's having both male and female characteristics, one that lacks sexual characteristics, one that's female at birth but then develops male characteristics, one that's male at birth then develops female characteristics, and 2 more out of that is so long I'm not going to read. You could just Google this. There
Yeah,
were
I
8.
mean, it's like
It's
we
not
were
in the
talking about
Bible, but
before. No, I mean, for one, it's non-biblical nonsense. But in another sense, it's talking about abnormalities. That's not recognized as a separate
it's-
gender
it's
necessarily.
genuinely-
That's
it's-
recognizing
it's-
abnormalities.
No,
It's not-
they're not
recognizing
recognizing
abnormalities.
They're not
abnormalities.
normalized.
They're just
Is-
they are. They got a whole gender for them. It wouldn't be extra biblical
See,
nonsense.
this is the anachronism
this
that
is
takes
the
place
point.
with this type of thing. Go
This is
go
the
ahead,
point
sorry.
the point I was talking about is that the cultures would agree, and they don't, because in India they didn't have 8 different genders. They had a number. Over here, I think in ancient Iranian culture that they had, it was only like 3 or something like that. It would. That's why I was arguing it is not universal.
There was no misunderstanding as to what it meant to be a man and a woman. That is universal. Every society today recognizes that because they're still in existence today.
Except
if
ancient Israel and ancient China, and ancient India, and who else?
there
I
was
mean,
no confusion
and Native
with that.
Americans.
They knew what men and women were. There's different ways to describe
I'm not.
abnormalities.
I
But
know
to
what a
say
man
that
and a
those were
woman is
different
too.
recognized genders on the span of the ridiculousness we see here today is an anachronistic. That's not how it was viewed in those
I
historic cultures.
I can't hear
It's
you,
just not-
Facade. But
We're
go
not
ahead, Wes.
talking
Oh, were you
about,
on mute?
we're
Sorry.
not, sorry, we're not talking about abnormalities when it comes to using a culture developing language to describe a people group together. Like, you wouldn't come up with a word to describe something that only exists one time and then use it frequently to describe people. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just not something that exists. And cultures that develop words for, especially like children and effeminate males, when you develop a term to come up with these people, you have their own gender identity in this language. It's because there's such a prominent place that you don't want to use the word man or woman or female or male because they don't check the boxes that you would use to describe those things. And if
But those society. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I thought you were done.
I was just saying, and if they did, they wouldn't have come up with a new term specifically to describe it.
One quick thing. I gotta get ready to go. But like you and Wes go ahead and keep talking. I'm not saying to end the show.
You can respond to that, and if you want to finish, I'm fine with it. I have to go in like 10 minutes maximum anyway, so if you want to keep going, we can for 10 minutes. If you want to just have final word, we could wrap up. I'm fine with that, and we can always continue.
Okay, yeah, we can wrap up with final word. But my wife, she's about to send me eyeballs, which means like to get off the show.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so I mean, you can respond or just say anything you want to say for the next minute or so, and then we'll have you back on if you'd like to come back on.
Well, I want to say first, thanks for having me on again. It's, as usual at this point, it's a fantastic conversation. I'll apologize because I know I talked over and interrupted from time to time, but
so do we.
Yeah, it's passionate discussion, so it's
Yeah.
par for the course. But for anybody watching, I know that aggravates me if I'm watching it. I recognize it. I'm sorry, but it's the nature of these discussions. I think there's so much more that we could have gotten to. Although I do really appreciate taking so much time to really drill down on the foundational aspects of it. I think it was a really good conversation. But I'd love to come on again and talk more about some of the applications, some of the societal implications that we've seen. That, like AAA, we talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
Like
Like in the private chat. Yeah.
Yeah, with parenting and with laws and with public regulations, and taking it out of the person's individual perception of their identity and what that means publicly, what that means for familial structures, what that means for societal structures. I think that'd be a fantastic conversation. If not me, then somebody else. But that's the another part of this conversation that I'm looking forward to.
Definitely, man. I want to get you back on for that. Our next open slot, we'll figure out what that is, and we'll get you back on, man, soon.
Awesome.
Definitely. That's it for me. Well, there was just a couple of two angry Catholics in the comments from my last episode. They said, like, get somebody on who's not who understands Christianity or something. Like, guys, if you don't like our guests, come on the show. Send an email. I responded. I sent that email in the chat, and I put it in the comments. Come on, get on the show. So I don't know what to say to you, but we don't go around looking for people that we can think we can defeat in arguments. That's what you're thinking. I don't even know how you would even get that idea from our.
We take all guests and deal with them accordingly. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you next week. Wes, thanks for joining us as always. We'll see you guys next week. Robin, thanks for joining in. I think it was your first time watching, or at least first time commenting. Appreciate you stopping by. Hope you enjoyed it. We do